Okay, we are recording in progress. Thank you for your support. I have to start with a question, which is this. We have 2 more sessions after this if we meet on the 11th, which is Veterans Day. And Ollie just automatically has a break on that day, just in respect for the holiday, not the whole week, just for people who have class on that day. So I would like to use that class. Is that a problem for anyone?
I'm going to be away in the next 2 classes, unfortunately.
In any case, huh? Okay. To do something wonderful, I hope, or
Yes.
to take care. Good, good. Excellent. So can we have 2 more sessions? Can we meet next week?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. In that case, I want to today's what I want to do today is to do some follow-up on the sort of internal dialogue issue and a little bit of practice around it. And then my wrap today is going to be about politics and how we're still in these concentric circles, how in the political realm, the narcissistic system, the system based on competition and self-aggrandizement plays out, and what would need to happen to move the political system into one that celebrates communion and the interest of the whole. After last class, Peter, I'm going to talk about our conversation. May I?
Sure.
Peter said that he wasn't sure that I wasn't sort of implying that feelings are right, and I was talking about the relationship of the executive function to the emotional parts of the brain and to the physical parts of the brain, and he wasn't sure that he was concerned that if what people came away with was the idea that you should follow your feelings, that didn't take into account the fact that people's emotional reactions also often come from a wounded place. That we've been in various ways, everything from neglected to traumatized. And so it's not like our emotional responses are like the pure truth. And there's not a reason for them to be sort of favored, if you want to call it that, or given priority over an intellectual function which overviews the needs of the whole and can sometimes host and modify and relate to the emotional parts of the body, give comfort to and direction to. So I wanted to be sure that I just wanted to go about to clarify that. It's not that the impulses, so again, the dominant metaphor throughout of communion is a conversation, a dialogue. So my point was the healthy relationship between the intellectual, the prefrontal cortex, which I'm calling the witnessing function, the self-witnessing function, or the executive function, that function which is able to plan and overview and see and guide, that executive function is not that we want that to be in a relationship of dialogue and communication, that is to say, listening to, serving, but also guiding and protecting and helping and stewarding the other parts of the human being, which is to say also the other parts of the brain. So the emotional part and the physical part. And so that there's an ongoing dialogue. And I realized afterwards that I should have made it maybe clearer, because I talked about I remember saying that the calculating part of the brain, of the logical and calculating part of the prefrontal cortex can tell us how to get there, but it can't tell us where to go. That narrow function, our logical function, we can't logically deduce the values or direction or what we want to do with our lives. We can't, it can tell us how to get there, but the goals have to come from a much larger negotiation, which includes our heart and our instincts and what our body tells us. For instance, what happened for people, well, so what our body tells us, including our gut. And by the way, Robert, I think I've not given proper, in future, I'll give more weight to the gut and the importance of it as but let's subsume that for now into the body. That's, part of the body's way of. So what I want to promote is a respectful dialogue between those. And then I made the analogy of the executive function in us, in the structure of the brain and in our internal dialogue, to have that be not what on the political level would be a dictator who manipulates, controls the people for his or her own, mostly his own aims or profit or glory, but who is a servant leader. So how can our executive function be a servant leader to our wholeness? As a servant leader who listens to the people, cares about the people, and has the people's welfare, has the welfare of the whole, not just himself, in mind. And so what I want to call, and so I thought it would be to clarify that language-wise. The first point, that the calculating function of the PFC, of the internal witness, of the executive function, is the one that just figures out how to get stuff done. But the precious function of the PFC is integration. Its job is to oversee, integrate, and steward the whole, to speak for and to be a guardian of the whole. So it's only when the PFC is untethered, is unrelated, is running amok on its own, and untethered to being connected to and of service and in communion with, and part of a wholeness with the other, our emotions and our body, that it loses touch, and then it's functioning blind. Does that make sense? Anybody want to say something about this issue? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Politically, there are libertarians,
Mm-hmm.
and there are authoritarians.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the rest of us
Mm-hmm.
who are in some way socialist or democracy in communication, understanding our independence on one another.
Yeah.
We're not libertarians and we're not authoritarians.
Yeah.
We're the other people.
Yeah.
And so when what happens with a libertarian is they get disembodied from whatever it is, the body politic, their family, their community. They get disembodied. They become libertarians. They become free, totally free. And anything they want to do in a libertarian mode of thought is okay. But then when they start having trouble with other people, they have an authoritarian side they can go to. And they can then come on really strong with their authoritarian and then tell people off and get them out of their way, and then become libertarians again. And I have been experiencing this for a few years now. It's so, well, I'm a logician basically. So that it hit me as like, well, gosh, you can't use truth tables on this because the frame of reference can shift at any moment, depending on what the individual wants. So being a socialist and having democratic values and being in a community, I'm part of the other people, and I don't feel I have the right to switch frame of references into libertarian and then into authoritarian, depending on whatever I want. I feel like I'm responsible for my life and responsible for my relationship with all other people too. So that's a peculiar frame of reference. And I just want to share with you all of you that I've been dealing with this for a couple of years now, and it's pretty incredibly difficult to continue thinking that people really are like this.
Beautiful, so articulate. Wow. Yeah, so it's interesting that the same people who talk about religious freedom want to use the state to impose their religious beliefs on other people, right? You want to use the power of the state to enforce your beliefs about, say, assisted suicide or about abortion or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah.
All of a sudden,
they do. They like.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the basic problem there is once you know the truth, you know, he by any means necessary.
All other perspectives are irrelevant.
That's right.
Once you know the truth.
That's right. I also thought it was fascinating that the court said that a corporation who has a religious belief against say birth control can say that their workers, you know, that the insurance they pay for their workers or partially pay for their workers can offer birth control. So in the name of religious freedom, the corporation gets to decide. The corporation's religious freedom trumps the individual freedom of their employees who may not agree with the religious belief, you know, tenets of the corporation.
Well, corporations can't think, they can't feel, and they can't have beliefs. They can't have freedom. Corporations, they're functions.
Cool.
I should mute myself.
That was great. I appreciate that so much. Do you say, how do you say Javon or Javon or? Can't hear you.
It's Javan, Javan, Javan.
Javan. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Bob, I'd like to add a very interesting view that I think jives with just exactly what you're saying, and that's Robert Lustig's book, The Hacking of the American Mind. It just fits right in. That basically we're in a fight or flight culture.
Right.
No space in the media.
Yeah.
Huge amount of violence. Entertainment is called anything violent. Too much violence in our culture. Too many people either killing themselves to get out of here or killing somebody else. So, and I think that the whole aspect of the three divisions of our nervous system have to do with an evolving shift in people, where we become more open to feeling and more feeling at the heart level and more intuitively connected to Earth and to one another. And I think that really is going to make a big difference. So opposing that are several films, Breaking Boundaries by Attenborough, another one of his, A Life on the Planet, The Earth from Space, which is absolutely stunning, from Nova. And basically, I think what's really required is to educate our populace and our politicians to where exactly we are in terms of science on this earth. And where we are is 8 out of 9 parameters in trouble. So when people say we want to go back to the way things have been, that's called disaster. So because we haven't done squat for 50 years, now we're going to have to do a lot in the next 10 to 20 years. And even then, there's still going to be some payment from nature because we've done so much abuse. So I think it's critical that we shift the dialogue, shift the way that we relate to one another, and up our energies into the level of the heart and the belly, both. And so that the executive function is something that uses its ability to move and act in alignment with values of the heart and values of the belly, both.
Cool. And so somewhere in there, there's an important distinction, and it's the part of the executive function to foster handling the distinction intelligently between emotional reactivity, right? So one of the issues is, and
Absolutely.
true emotion or deep emotion or in touch feelings, because an awful lot of the Trump phenomenon is about slavish, unmediated emotional reactivity. All right, I want to go to so I wonder if anyone would like to report something that they noticed about their internal dialogue, or if anyone's willing to share some as we do it, just to mess around with that idea. You're muted, Leslie.
Internal dialogues typically have to do with things that are personally sensitive to people.
Yeah.
It's awkward discussing them, but
Yeah.
in particular,
So let me just check yourself and don't share anything that doesn't feel good to share, right?
right. But I'm trying to share something that has been an issue for me without getting too specific on it.
Yeah.
And in essence, it has to do with talking yourself up when you are feeling like everything is sort of weighing you down, and it has a huge positive effect on me to do that to myself, and seriously, to just say to myself, I'm a good person, I'm a nice person.
Hang on. I'm gonna have Leslie, hang on. I'm gonna just frame this a little bit. Let's do this thing. Everybody can do it. Check in. Take a minute. Check in with your body. What's going on inside? I want you to say what you're going to say, but why doesn't everybody check in with ourselves? And you check in with yourself, and then do it. Then say what you would say to yourself, and we can all check whether we feel better, worse, or are unaffected by it. Is that all right?
That sounds good. And so I look for things to prove to myself that I am worthy. And
take on the voice. Take on the voice of the internal witness. Say, "Hey, Leslie, you are worthy."
Dogs love me.
Yeah.
And that's a good sign that they're picking up on something that perhaps other humans may as well.
So how did that go over for inside other folks when dogs love me? How does that do it? Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I've noticed in terms of working with myself that my if I had to pick a foundation for my self-talk, it's gratitude. I spend a lot of time in gratitude, but it's on purpose. I do that all throughout the day, which sets up a really positive. And I find that I'm much more gentle on myself than other folks. Once again, from what I said last week, 12 years of therapy, and you too can love your mother and yourself. And I have been in therapy, including analysis. And it really, I'm lucky, not lucky. I've worked hard to become very gentle with myself, because I do make mistakes, and I'm very gentle about it. And I find that that it is hard to have a peaceful life. And my goal is contentment. This happy, I don't know what happy is. What happens when I get a piece of cake, that's happy. But contentment, I once asked my mother, I said, "Are you happy?" And she said, "No." And I was shocked because my dad gave her a nice life and they worked. Anyway, she said, "No." And I was like, and she said it vehemently. And I said, "Oh." And she said, "I'm content." And that just really gave me a lot of permission to be content. I'm very content. Very content. It's a nice feeling, and it's something I can create.
Yeah.
Happy, I don't know. Get me a piece of cake and pizza, and I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know.
I love that. But I want to bring it a little more experiential. So anyone else, when Leslie said, why don't you say it again and let's check in with ourselves. What happens inside us when you say, do an example of this, talk yourself up.
My cat loves me. Dogs love me. So
Boo-boo.
theoretically, that potential is
Come here.
humans too.
So anybody can anyone report what happens in your body when you hear that? My dog loves me.
My dog tripped me, so I'm not sure about that one.
Okay. So please, I'd like folks to stay with the exercise. What happens in you when you hear Leslie talk to herself in that way?
Boo-boo.
So I feel a warmth and an expansion in my chest. I just hear my dog loves me. Something gets soft and expanded in my chest. If I would talk to myself that way, when I hear that kind of self-talk, that's what happens for me.
Come here. Come here. Come here.
It makes me brave
Come here.
to do things that maybe
There's
I
my
would.
dog right there.
Yeah.
It makes
me want to
me
pick my
take
dog.
risks now and then,
Yeah.
which I've never really been much of a risk taker in my life, but I'm getting so old now. If I don't start taking risks occasionally, I'm going to be dead.
Okay. So what? Check now. That piece of self-talk was that supportive? Did you or not?
No.
It was
I'm
supportive.
neutral.
It means it's time.
It felt
time to do
supportive.
Mhm.
Right.
Regardless of the effect that it may have on us. I'm doing it stuff for me now.
Yeah. So that worked for you. That was good guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that it was stirring, well, it's about time. That felt like supportive sternness, if you want to call it that, rather than putting you down or making you feel dumb or stupid or
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I think I've been too seeking safety so many years that I just feel ready now to take some risks based on how much my cat loves.
Yeah, I listened to that. I just feel good. It's interesting because there's a self-criticism in that, if you want to call it that. I've been too something or other, but it's coming from not from a loving place, but also it's from a hope. That's a ground from which to make a change that you want to make.
Exactly.
Anybody have an experience with a nasty internal witnessing?
Not anymore.
that guy named Albert Ellis, who did that rational emotional behavior therapy.
Yeah.
I look at a lot of courses on that, but my most favorite line is he said, you know, I cannot cure you, but I can show you how to be a lot happier.
Mm.
And that seemed to me to be pretty, shows a lot of being humble and a lot of humility, but also showing a lot of confidence as well. So that when a person says something like that, I say, hey, this guy's probably okay, you know, he's not crazy. but when someone says I can fix you, like, you know, a religious right person, said, I don't need to be fixed. You know?
Yeah.
I'm okay. I'm okay. So I think that's something that when I go to that a lot, because like this thing, when the authoritarian and the libertarian thing, I just come up with this into this state of disbelief or discontinuity or something, and I'm not able to think because they contradict one another, and I can't deal with that. So so I kind of fought back in this other one. Well, I can just let them go on because, you know, I can't ever, like you said, you can't ever deal with it. So that's what comes up for me when in situations like that.
So that Ellis quote for you felt that way to me too, but for you represents leadership in a good way, sort of humble leadership.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to call it that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And would be a model for a humble internal executive function.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
I use a different approach. If something negative comes up, I act it out with as much volume as I can, because basically there's a lot of energy locked up in that negative talk. It's not true, or it might be true in a very isolated instance. So I move that energy up and out, dance it out, yell it out, whatever it takes to clear it, and then use that energy in a different way.
So your executive function is saying to you, this is okay. You've got this energy. You can express it in a way that's not going to do harm, and that will feel good. Yeah.
Also, I'll recapture the energy for other uses.
Yeah.
It doesn't
And
keep on going.
that'll serve you. But again, you're not just busting it out. There's an executive function which is holding it, if you want to call it, which is
Yes.
what's giving you permission to do that. Cool.
Yeah. The other thing that I tell myself is I'm an incredibly fortunate person. I have a 1 out of 130 million chances of being here, because that's about the percentage of an ejaculation that fertilizes that egg. There's only one that gets to be here.
So does that help you? Therefore make the best of it, or is it too much pressure?
No, I also know that I'm part of the divine and part of God, and I've had that experience, so I know that I just have to forgive myself a little every now and then for what I do.
All right. So
Potent.
so when we feel like this is done, so this was about the internal relationships, complete change of thing. I'm going to talk, my rap today, which I'm ready to start doing, is about politics, is about the political realm. And remember, what we're talking about is the concentric macrocosms. And what we're saying is that the same issues play out in each of these realms, and that in each of these realms, what we're talking about is, can we make a shift from a competitive, individualistic, self-aggrandizing power over model to one that's about communion in the interests of the whole. All right. So same themes, but now in the political realm. Okay, all right, if I get going on that one. So,
Later,
I think on the political system, in some level, the great mystery is in a democratic society, we have a democratic society, we vote for our political leaders. We're allowed to organize for our political leaders and political issues. How do we end up with a society with so much economic inequality, with so much poverty, with so many basic needs not met, with the public space so neglected and shrunk in a democracy? And I think the beginning of an answer to that is about the difficulty of running a democratic. There's a Quinn, it may be yours. I don't know if it's your things there. Something's making some noises. Is that okay? It's a testament the difficulty of running a democratic political system on top of an economic system that doesn't even pretend to be democratic. How do you run a democratic political system on top of a undemocratic economic system? And we talked about the economic system and that it doesn't pretend to, the various ways it's not democratic. Everything, well, the most obvious thing is if you've ever had difficulty with a boss, if you work for someone or a company, it will not be long before they tell you this is not a democracy. You can make suggestions, but this is not a democracy. We're not voting on stuff here, right? The boss decides, or the company decides. So it doesn't, and there's no pretense to be democratic. They might pretend to be nice, and take you into account, but it's not pretending to be a democracy. It's also not the economic system isn't democratic because it's $1, one vote, because it doesn't, all of the, because it leads to an increased the one we have, increased concentration of economic power, and because the economic system itself doesn't constrain people to take care of the interests of the whole that don't enter into the particular bottom line of corporate decision makers. So anyway, that whole class was about why the economic system isn't democratic and doesn't pretend to be. Even so simple as if some company wants to leave a town, they don't ask the town, is it okay if we leave? You've given us all these tax credits and built schools and generations. What is it okay if we leave? They say we can do better somewhere else. Goodbye, right? So, but because the economic system claims to in conservative economic doctrine, but because the economic system is not constrained to meet the general need of itself, to do so, it has to be constrained by an economic system, by a political system that holds it accountable, that motivates it, and if necessary, forces it to be a good citizen, to be corporate good citizens of the society, and to use the amazing, this amazing capitalist motor and product ability, automatic ability to be incredibly productive, to have that motor, you have not the motor run the car, but the car and the driver run the motor. That just occurred to me, that particular metaphor, but that has to be in service of the whole. And that has to happen from an external political system that restrains it, holds it accountable, and puts it in service of the general good. The conservative argument is that the general good will automatically be served by the sum of self-interested economic decisions is just wrong, and that's what the previous class, or whenever it was, 2 classes ago, was about. But every society, including kings and empires and everything else, needs a social contract, is based on a social contract. Every society has to meet enough, has to offer its citizens enough of a stake for them to buy in, that we had to have a functioning society. And that stake might include, if it's slaves, it might include a lot of violence. But in one way or other, the system has to be able to have enough buy-in from enough of the citizenry to provide a foundation. So it has to have a viable social contract. It's not perfect. It may not be fair, but it has to be at least accepted as good enough for people to say, okay, I'm willing to be part of this political world. Or the system will collapse. The system will collapse. I mean, the richest, I'm trying to think of what Louis XIV, the richest system that you can imagine, will collapse, and people's heads will be on stakes at some point if it doesn't meet enough of the needs, given all of the cultural defenses and political and physical defenses of itself. If it doesn't meet enough needs for people ultimately to decide that the costs are not bearable. So in our nation, there's been two very major periods of that. One was the period of the robber barons around the turn of the century, and which was the railroad people and the Rockefellers and whatever, and the people who were shooting down labor workers when they were trying to organize, and that led to Teddy Roosevelt and to the antitrust movement. So the antitrust movement was a correction of when the robber baron thing got just beyond. Also the national parks were created then because to preserve some of nature from the railroad companies that were becoming forestry companies because they'd been handed land by the government. And the other big one is the Great Depression. And what happened with the New Deal was that was depression based on the fact that working people were so not cut in that working people didn't make enough money to buy the stuff that was being made. They discovered that if you don't give working people enough so they can buy the things you make, you don't have a market and your economy will collapse. So to that kind of a depression, the New Deal was a correction. And it was a correction that involved empowering working people, empowering restraints on labor relationships, and involving institutions that would deal with public needs in various ways. So we've had major corrections in our system, even though it's running on a capitalist economy and there's a lot of corporate capitalist power. And what I want to say is today, we're in a situation that has enormous volatility and enormous potential because we are in the period of a collapse of the post-war social contract. The post-World War II social contract that has held us together has collapsed or is collapsing. I want to talk about that a little bit because it turns out that that contract was based on certain conditions that were historically fleeting. So the post-war social contract, it was supposed to prove, I mean, the ideology here was it proved that Marx was wrong. Marx said that if in a capitalist system, it would lead to the immiseration was his term, the increasing the balance of power was so uneven that inevitably would lead to the increasing immiseration of working people. And the post-war social contract and the economic growth that happened after the war was to give a lie to that Marxist idea. And it said, we can have economic growth. And we are going to have economic growth at such an incredible rate, at such a historic rate, that it will raise all ships. And the issues of the division of the society's wealth will be dwarfed by the fact that by the growth of the growth of the wealth. Economic growth and giving people some share of it will take care of any fights over the division of that. Will overwhelm. The growth will be so much it will overwhelm any problems about the division of that wealth. And that's what's, one of the terms for that is trickle down, essentially. That if what's good for business is good for everybody, right? Yeah.
Trickle is a wonderful word.
Isn't it? Trickle down. But the post-war social contract was based on certain specific historical conditions, which are a lot of them no longer. So one was, so I'll just talk about America, right? The US right now. We were the only surviving economy. We were the only advanced economy that hadn't had bombs on our shore, blow up on our shores. So there was no international competition. If you were a large corporation, a monopoly corporation in the US, you had no competition. You were a monopoly, a successful, or oligopoly, if you want to call it that. So you didn't have international competition. The reconstruction of the destruction from the war, including the European economy, was an enormous opportunity for construction and growth and investment. You still had in place the economic imperialism that supported our growth and sort of access to very cheap natural resources of in the third world. You had a tremendous outlet for investment in the military spending it took to defend that empire, to keep in place business friendly, if you want to call it that, governments in the third world. And you had easy access to fossil fuels. So there were a lot of historical conditions that allowed those companies to say, you know what, we're going to cut you in. And so significant portions, the social contract cut enough Americans into our economic system to be functioning. And that broke down somewhat as 1/3 of the workforce were monopoly workers, worked for these large corporations. This is very broad generalization, but roughly 1/3 worked for those corporations. And those corporations said, well, we can afford to let you unionize. We can afford to give you a health care. We can afford, for you to have decent income and to be able to buy houses and stuff like that. We are not letting you take part in deciding anything. You don't get to decide what we make, where we make it, whether it's valuable what we're making, but we'll cut you in to our growth. Another third was public workers, and there was the growth of the public sector, which was relatively well paid and unionized force. And another third was essentially marginalized workers, which included, for instance, farm workers. But they were offered something like some degree of a safety net. And when then that didn't work, a prison system to house them and to be ghettoized. So imperfect, but that held together. So the historical change we face is the growth of the international corporation. The fact that the large corporate capitalist institutions have outgrown the boundaries of the nation state and are no longer restricted by or they don't have to bow to it. This would be a better way to say that, but they don't have to do what the nation state wants them to do or would want them to do. And the fact that their internationalism was the basis for two big changes. One, for a need from their point of view or pressure to rescind the social contract. So from the corporate point of view, being an American large corporation no longer gave you a world monopoly. You are now competing with monopoly corporations all over the world. And some of the conditions of the social contract you could not afford from the corporate point of view, you couldn't afford anymore when you were competing with other corporations who had access to cheaper labor forces, to third world labor, and so forth. So you were now competing worldwide, and so there was a need from the corporate point of view to rescind the social contract, which was called, and they called it austerity. This was very big here, but it was very big in Europe. We have to in the advanced countries, the working class had gotten fat and happy, and that the European countries had to do austerity. Austerity meant basically to discipline their labor force and rescind a lot of the privileges, including not just money, but unionization, but also vacation and leave and things of that sort. A lot of the privileges that the European working class had earned for itself, more than the American one had, by the way. So in order to compete, and then they were going, we can't compete with corporations who are hiring Taiwanese teenagers. So one was the need to it, but the pressure to do so, but the other was the ability to rescind it. And the ability to rescind it was basically based on the fact of being largely beyond the reach, of being not accountable to and not having a stake in the nation state. Not being accountable to and not having a stake in the effects on the nation state. And that meant it used to be communities would compete for offering a good business climate to corporations, and then it was, and it still is, and states would compete to offering a good business climate. Oh, well, you won't have to pay taxes and we'll build you schools and roads and whatever. But now the nation states were competing with providing the conditions that would attract capitalist corporations. And those conditions were cheap labor, cheap raw materials, low taxes, low regulation, pro-business governments, military governments that gave military support to pro-business governments, and our direct military support for pro-business governments around the world. So they had the ability to rescind or take back the post-war social contract, and it allowed them to, one, weaken and dismantle unions. That started with Reagan and the traffic control strike. That was a shot over the bow of labor. So, I mean, talk about a privileged and powerful group, specialized group of labor. And we were saying, if we can do it to them, you know, the people who keep our planes from crashing, look out, everybody else. So basically union smashing. Attacks on the public unions, you know, there've been all these people saying we're paying our public workers too much, and they're privileged because they're not as poor as the poorer workers. and therefore it's costing us taxes. So telling the populace, you're a taxpayer and do you really want to pay these public workers to have a decent wage? Forgetting the fact that, of course, the private system has to compete with the public system. And so actually having good public wages provides a floor for private wages. But again, it's dividing the interest. It's pretending that the interests of non-public workers are opposed to public workers as opposed to that they're actually in sync. Dismantling of the safety net and the reduction of public services, of schools, of parks, of bridges, of product safety, of air pollution. It's just the general neglect of the public space. So all of those are results of the fact that corporations were in a position to essentially rescind the social contract that had held things, the post-war social contract. So we're at a crossroads. And so that social contract, by the way, so that social contract was supported by Republicans and Democrats. Republicans sort of all out, except for the parts that, that were on the welfare side, and Democrat, so for instance, the Clinton era was an area where we had the economy did really well and working people did, where it was a tremendously successful period of growth, and the distribution of wealth got worse, not better. So the Democrats were sort of nibbling around the edges of trying to make it a slightly kinder or nicer, but to not challenge the basic structure, the basic power. So now we're in a point where too many people don't have their immediate needs met, where middle-class people, you can be well off middle class and one illness and can wipe you out. And you can have nothing to give your kids. How much money do you have to know that you could have, that however your dying process goes, you'll have something to leave your kids? Environmental, social costs, and the cost to communities. Which is to say that the system for too many people does not provide, Quinn, you want to say this with me? Does not meet people's needs to be an empowered, respected, contributing, and I want to say materially with this basic needs satisfied, member of a meaningful whole, whether it's a community or a nation, that is worthy of our allegiance and in some sense sacred. So to a sense of belonging, of having a stake and a say, and one's basic survival needs taken care of by the system. So we have a broken social contract. The nation state has not been able to stand up against international corporate power. So you sort of have on the international scale, sort of what was happening here in the nation during the robber baron period. You sort of have the new robber barons running roughshod over the whole world with no political system to contain it. And that's what's referred to as the New World Order. So this means there's a crossroads, and in one way it's an incredible opportunity for democratic and pro-social, whatever you want to call it, forces to say no more. Biden, for instance, is really, looks like the Democrats have not done this. Obama did not do this, but Biden is really trying to offer a transformational plan that would actually reach the daily living conditions of the majority of people. If that could succeed, if that could be done, this generation's version of a New Deal, that would be one response. And one of the things that's interesting is, as long as nation states are competing for pleasing the corporations, it's really hard. It's really hard to gather the power to do it. But right now, they just voted on an international agreement in the developed countries to agree among themselves on a minimum tax rate on corporations, rather than competing for who can attract the corporations. So that's something Biden pushed through. It's just the very beginning, but an international agreement to stop, he calls it, to stop the race to the bottom. And to sort of re-empower nations, but that has to happen. See, it can't happen just on the nation state. It now means that nation states have to cooperate to hold corporations accountable. But the failure of the nation state, I'm saying, is at the root of the backlash against the New World Order. No system can forever ultimately neglect its human foundation beyond a certain limits. It has to offer the populace enough to maintain a buy-in, to maintain social order. And when the social contract collapses, something's got to go. So the historic opportunity is, can the nation state or the political system tame or civilize or hold accountable corporate economic machine enough to keep the economic system in being a good citizen of the whole? Now, the problem is, this is back to the question of running a democratic political system on an undemocratic economy. So the political system is contested terrain. It's not a fair fight because of the influence of the economic system on the political system, which is not just direct in the sense of lobbyists and all that sort of stuff. It's also indirect in the sense that you're not going to get reelected if the economy collapses. So you want to keep the economy happy. So it's not a fair fight in that sense, but at the time when there is a collapse, there is an opportunity. And the state, as a contested terrain, the nation state, the political system, is the place where forces of democracy can fight and can organize. So both responses to the failure of the nation state to fulfill its mission of standing up for the needs of the populace and to rein in, the international robber baron stage of the New World Order, is, can the nation states and the states, can the populace exert enough influence on the political system under these conditions to make a change? And can the nation states also organize to cooperate in reining them in? And that brings us back to the sort of basic theme of the whole versus the parts, or communion versus narcissism. On the international level, can the nation states operate to cooperate for the interests of the whole, or do they continue to operate as separate competing entities? So the responses, one response is a movement for democratic empowerment to the failure of the nation state, and the other one is fascism, authoritarianism and fascism. And next week, I'm going to talk about fascism. We're going to talk about fascism, how it grows out of a response to the collapse of this existing social contract, and what can be done to combat it implied in that is the way to combat it is to cure the underlying economic and social conditions that are the root of it. That's my wrap for today.
So are you going to solve all the ills of our society by the final class, I hope?
You know, you give me one more class. If you guys are willing to agree to one more class, I'll do
I
that.
feel like I'm going through something really great here, but the anticipation is killing me.
Oh. You know
I
what?
just-
We'll
I
spin the
don't-
bottle, and someone in this group will have to solve all these problems.
It's just so frustrating to even read the paper. It's just so
Yeah.
frustrating to
Yeah.
how the Republicans, the working class Republican people that used to be Democrats, they're just shooting themselves. I used to say in the foot, but now I feel like they're shooting themselves in the head with, you know, their political ideas.
Yeah.
I
just think that we're at such a knife edge, because if we educate ourselves as to where our nature is scientifically, not in terms of belief, but in terms of science, where are we? What's the result of what we're doing? And it has so many repercussions on so many levels that it's an opportunity for great change, and it's an opportunity for disaster all at the same time.
Yeah.
Because all the arguments about who gets what aren't going to mean a thing if nature starts dumping us, and it will if we keep it up.
Yeah. Quinn, you're mooted.
And I think too that a lot of Republicans, especially the ones further to the right, they think we have broken the social contract. And I think they feel that the only thing that can happen is to put Trump in, and that he will keep the contract.
Mhm.
And I think that for many of them, their belief, their thoughts about Trump are intertwined with some of their religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so powerful for them. And that when it's gone from a thought into this belief, I think that's what's happened in terms of, I just went to a class on this very stuff. And I think when you put somebody's belief into something, the power behind it, when you kind of twine it with religion, it really gets strong.
Rita, do you want to share some of the things you shared about the history of how some of these original deals got made?
Well, with Trump, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So before Trump was elected, there was and I haven't looked at my notes or anything recently, but there was a conference of sorts where Trump was anointed by all these religious leaders to be the chosen one and to uphold their beliefs, their belief systems, and all of the religious prophecies, if you will. They felt like he was prophesied by God to save this country, and that he would be this guy to do that. And that is the part, Quinn, that you were talking about, that when that connection happens, when God and government are connected in that way, there is nothing more powerful than that. And there's almost nothing that can fight it. And that is what, you know, I have a family of religious radicals. I am a recovering religious radical to a certain degree. However, I was always rebellious and I always questioned, and that's what brings me to where I'm at today. And they are still stuck in that religious place rather than a spiritual place. But they all believe, the ones that are still very far right religious, that the government is out to get us, that there's a conspiracy. It's all the QAnon stuff. Even if they don't say it, it's underneath. And it all started really with Trump and all of the religious leaders supporting him and anointing him as that prophet that has come to save the country. And again, they cannot let go of that. And part of that is, I don't know if any of you watch Lisa Ling's.
I
she
did.
She has
I
a
did.
special on Sunday nights on CNN.
I
Anyway,
do.
yeah. So she was talking to all these white supremacists, but really where it breaks down was, and this was part of my talk too, was in the industrial age, and she hit on it this last week, when Detroit was, you know, a mecca of money and power and industry. And then, you know, the Japanese took over the car industry basically, and everybody lost their jobs and the unions were no more. And so, and it were basically white American men that are now, you know, retired white American men, and they feel like they have lost their power basically. And they don't put it that way, but what they want to do is save their culture, save their power, and save their what they believe America is supposed to be, and that is white. And so that's how Trump came to power, and that is how he still has power, is that connection with those disenfranchised white groups of men and with the religious people. And, you know, I just think all the time, how will the blinders come off? Jesus really spoke to it when he went into the temple and overturned all the money changers' tables. You probably have all heard that story. And he called them whitewashed sepulchres. In other words, they were decayed inside. All the religious leaders of the day were decayed inside, but they were whitewashed in their religion and the rules. And that's where we find ourselves today, I believe. And I think the blinders have to come off somewhere in their own group and their own leadership in order for that to change. So.
But one of the things you mentioned that there was basically in that negotiation, there was basically some specific things that they wanted, that if he signed on for those, then it was good enough. Do you remember what those were?
Well, abortion was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
That he would, you know, make abortion illegal. Oh, Jerusalem. That's the big one. When he moved the temple from Palestine, or the embassy from Palestine to Jerusalem, or was going to, I don't think that's happened, but when he said he would do that, that was one of the pacts they made, that the power and Israelites are the chosen people according to the religious rite. The Bible in the Old Testament, that's what it says, but the New Testament did away with the law. In other words, did away with the Old Testament, but they still hold on to, they want to play both sides. So they hang on to that the Israelites are the chosen people. And so that was one of the pacts that Trump would protect Israel and would protect Jerusalem as the place where the embassy should be, the temple should be, all the religious power should be.
That Jerusalem should belong to
those were-
Israel and not be shared with the
Exactly,
Palestinians.
exactly.
So that's
Exactly.
really, so it was, because you go like, Trump obviously could give a shit about these issues and has no religious beliefs of any sort. So basically, they brokered a deal that if he would support Israel and the Israel's taking over Jerusalem exclusively, and abortion, and maybe there were a few other issues, but it's quite programmatic. If he did that, then he was a vehicle of God, because he would help these things happening. And
The third one to stop.
and when you're outside of it, you go like, how does this? There's nothing about this person that fits the value, how he lives his life, that fits the values of these people. And so one of the things you said in that talk was, but if he's a vehicle of God, it doesn't matter, because he can be an imperfect vehicle. He's an imperfect vehicle, but he's doing God's will, which, by the way, is a little bit like what the capitalist corporations say too. He's an imperfect vehicle, but as long as he's striking down all environmental regulations and rights for working people's rights and so forth and so on, he's an imperfect vehicle, but hey, he's doing what we need done. So
Right. They say that, that's why Jesus had to come and die on the cross, is because we're all imperfect. So he's just imperfect, but God is still using him and has chosen him.
Wasn't stopping immigration, making America white, also
Yes.
one of, yeah.
Well, it is biblical that we're supposed to support our elected leaders. And Trump's attitude of not having actually lost the election, even though he did, is totally anti-biblical or anti-religion.
Well, it's steeped in hypocrisy.
He had
Everywhere.
He had no idea about anything having to do with the word. And I don't know. It used to be, I'm Christian, and I used to love Christians, and I can't talk to Christians anymore, even though I'm a Christian. I can't even find a church that I can go to that.
Where do you live?
In Medford. There are churches you can go to, but
There's some pretty cool,
there's so
I think pretty progressive, cool
anger
churches around.
and hypocrisy, even in the churches in this valley. It's very disturbing, very disturbing where things are going.
I would like to comment on this. It seems to me that the base have chosen Trump, and they see him as their savior. And I think Trump sees himself as God. So so with Trump thinking that he's God and them thinking he's a savior, it's a pretty powerful operating system. And if you have a big base of Republicans and authoritarians, libertarians that think Trump is a savior and Trump thinks he's God, they can really get along well. There's no problems here. There's no blinders coming off.
Well, all I can say is waste another 5 years and see what Mother Nature does to you. That will change more minds than any kind of craziness that they hold.
But the Christians that I know, they feel like they're the ones that are being persecuted right now.
Right.
It's such a huge gap between reality and their thought processes. It's terrifying to me.
And if Trump does get back in office, he's going to try to make it so that he can be in office till he dies.
Mhm.
I really believe that.
Called fascism.
Yep.
You know, when you look at the collapse of the social contract for the largely white male industrial working class, of course, there was a very important Black part of the industrial working class in Detroit and Chicago and all that. But I mean, you can look at that as, oh, that's all about white skin privilege, and they just trying to hold on to extra privileges and racial privileges that they didn't deserve. But they're also just trying to hold on to being a functional, respected part of a functioning society that was functioning for them. And so I mean, I think understanding that this is a culture that's had the ground pulled out from under them by economic forces they don't understand, that their world is collapsing, and their world wasn't just all bad because they were white. Their world was a to some degree a functional world of hardworking, respectable people making a living and being able to feel that they could offer their kids a decent future. And that's collapsed. And one more second, and the political system, including the Democrats, did nothing to support or mitigate that collapse. They would say, oh, we'll just get more education. You know, that was basically the line. You guys better catch up and get you some education, and so that you can fit into this new world. But that was not a realistic answer. So they were abandoned, and they are pissed off for really. They have really good reason to be pissed off. The question is, pissed off at who or what? And what Trump and the right wing has done is convince them to be pissed off at immigrants, Black people, latte drinking liberals, Washington, you know, whatever the hell, you know, you want it to
Educated.
be. You know, yeah, educated people. Yeah.
I think
So,
too,
yeah.
I think two other factors that need to be mentioned is I think they're pissed off that women are getting a larger role in society. We're taking government positions, etc. And also gay rights have become quite accepted. And these are two other areas that they don't like. They want the patriarchal values of the 50s to return.
Mhm.
And it's not going to happen. And I think those are two other areas that are making them mad. Women
Yeah,
and
yeah.
gays,
Yep, for sure.
and trans, and the whole movement.
Yeah, that was one of the other things in the pact that
I
the
know.
religious group made with Trump.
Well, yes, we shouldn't even buy wedding cakes,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, there's more than just the obvious blue and red.
But when speaking to liberals, if one sees this not just as a bunch of people standing up for their male white privileges, but as people whose basic culture has collapsed on them and who haven't been
Yeah.
helped to move on to something else, it gives you a deeper understanding. And then they're seeing themselves as victims is not quite
Yes.
not so hard. It's not that hard to understand, I actually think most people who've done horrible things in the world have done so because they thought they were victims. I think the worst fascist aspects of what the Israeli government has done, because they think, as Jews, we were such bad victims that we're entitled to do whatever, that entitles us to take care of ourselves in a way that doesn't worry about victimizing anyone else. So everybody, I think, crowns themselves as the most important victim in the world, as the basis for what they want to fight for, or experience themselves that way.
Well, and the white males that you're talking of and speaking of, they lost their place of belonging. And I mean, that's what this class is about. They lost their place of belonging.
Yep.
And so when
Belonging and ruling.
no, but you
Belonging
see,
and
these
ruling.
guys weren't ruling. The white working class was not ruling. There
Oh,
is a white ruling class, but the white ruling class, if it succeeds in convincing the white working class that their whiteness makes them allies, then they've won the fight.
Yep.
Because being white does not make you an empowered ruler in this society. Only a
no, but it
tiny
allows
portion.
you to identify with the,
Yes.
you can identify with the
Yes.
ruling.
Yeah. If you've bamboozled into that, then you are.
Well,
You
there's
could-
also a basic fact in the corporation, the fact that its principle is to make money, that it has no social conscience and it has no natural conscience. It was a big mistake, because that attracts the greedy, the sociopath, the psychopath, who doesn't really care. And so, as long as it makes money, if it makes money, it's good. That is the underpinning of capitalism.
Yep.
Of course, we can see what communism has done. So neither of those is going to be the answer coming in the future. We have to have corporations that are interested in the health of the people, the health of the nature, the health of the country. Otherwise, they're willing to do whatever as long as it makes money. And John Perkins, who worked in South America at the behest of the government for, I forget what, Peace Corps. And what he found was he was just at the basis of what he calls the death economy. They destroyed every place they went, including being the American capitalism was the first to start tearing down the Amazon. Communists to get in. So things have to change. They are going to change. Will they change towards fascism, or will they change in a more holistic dimension is the question.
Wow.
There we are.
Yep.
That seems like a good
Yep.
ending
That's right.
point. And I know that in what I'm offering, I'm trying to find the line between looking at, a clear-sighted understanding of what's going on, and maintaining, I'm trying not to use the word hope, but maintaining an understanding that there are also powerful forces moving in directions that can make for the changes we want. And so I don't know if I'm threading that needle well. I noticed at the end of a talk like this, I was going, did I just leave everyone depressed here? So,
No,
okay, good.
No, it's,
I think the more people get into harmony, the more their power is, the more their effect is, and it needs to be at the level of love and appreciation. And basically understanding these white men are not our enemy, they're a fellow human being. So it's just such an important difference. Hate is a terrible energy to hold in your body.
Yeah. All right. So next week, we're going to talk about fascism. Ooh, that's going to be fun.
Be here. You're recording it, so I can listen to it later. So that's good.
Yes, thank you. Well, I hope so. It's up to these guys if they have to remind me. Well, so let's
We
agree.
have two
Let's
left?
agree for Robert's sake, at least we'll make sure to record. We have 2 more sessions.
2 more, okay.
2 more.
Yeah, I may still be able to tune in. And let me, if I can, I'll take my iPad with me. Maybe I can.
Whatever works. All right,
Okay.
folks.
2.
Nice meeting
Thank
with you
you.
again.
Next week.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.